The envelope with 5 years of savings trembled in Marlene's hands when the iron gate closed right in front of her. "Land of that quality is not for people like you," said Anselmo Brandam without even looking properly at her face. Behind him, 2 workers laughed softly, and the laughter hurt more than the refusal. No one there, on that afternoon of dust and shame, could imagine that, less than a year later, it would be Anselmo himself who would knock on the door of a company hat in hand, asking to buy exactly what he had once refused to sell. This is a story about dignity, about the time that reveals who truly deserves respect, and about a woman who turned humiliation into purpose without ever stopping being who she was. Come with me, and I'll tell you this story. Villa das Palmeras was not large, and everyone knew everyone else's name. They also know. With that kind of certainty, no one needs to say out loud who owned the land and who only had their hands to work the land of others. Marlene Aires was 27 years old and had a talent her mother, Donna Azul, always said came from her grandfather. She sewed as if the needles obeyed her, not the other way around. Party dresses, wedding truces, even the baptism clothes of the village children, everything passed through her hands. But Marlene had a dream larger than sewing for others for half of what her work was worth. She wanted to set up a real workshop, a place with a large tank for dyeing fabric, long clothesline to dry in the sun, space to store rolls of linen and cotton without the humidity spoiling everything, as it did in the little clay lean-to where she had worked for 8 years, and the only piece of land with clean water running nearby, with the shade of mango trees and soil firm enough to support a building, was the strip of ground that bordered Donna Zulmira's backyard, a strip that belonged to Anselmo Branda, owner of half the fertile lands on that side of the river. "He doesn't even use that piece, my daughter," said Donna Zulmira one night, coughing between one sentence and the next, her body growing thinner under the shawl. "It's been overgrown for years. Maybe he'll sell it." Marlene saved for 5 years. She put away coin by coin in a biscuit tin buried under the loose floorboard in her room, and never told anyone, not even Vicente, the carpenter who had worked in the workshop next to her house since childhood and who, over time, had stopped looking at Marlene the way one looks at a neighbor. "You should let me go with you," said Vicente on the day Marlene finally told him the plan. "A man by your side, in front of Suanse, might carry more weight." "If the man carries more weight than the money I'm offering," Marlene replied, "then it's not land I want to buy from him. It's respect, and respect isn't bought by hiding behind anyone." She went alone. She put on the only good dress she had, the blue linen one she herself had cut in her free hours, pinned up her hair, and walked the 4 kilometers to the headquarters of the Brando farm with the envelope of money pressed against her chest, as if he could protect what she had carried inside her for years. Hope Anselmo received her at the gate. He did not invite her in, did not offer water, did not pull a chair into the shade. He stood there, arms crossed, listening to the proposal with a patience that was not kindness but contempt disguised as politeness. "Do you really have all that money?" he asked, looking at the envelope as one examines a counterfeit coin. "I do, Seu Anselmo. It's a fair price. You can check it yourself with anyone who understands land around here." He laughed, a short laugh with no joy in it. "It's not a question of price, Donna Marlene. It's a question of who I want as a neighbor on my boundary. Land of that quality is not for people like you. Tomorrow, you'll want to build a tank, then a well. Then you'll come asking for passage on my road. I know how these things start." "What you know," said Marlene, her voice trembling but without lowering her eyes, "is poor people asking for favors. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm offering hard-earned money, made with honest work, for a piece of scrubland you haven't set foot on in 10 years. And that's exactly why I won't sell," Anselmo answered, turning his back. "Because people like you, when they get a piece of ground, think they're already people like me, and they're not." The iron gate slammed shut. Behind it, 2 workers carrying sacks of corn had stopped to watch, and they laughed softly, the way one laughs at someone already defeated before the fight even begins. Marlene walked the 4 kilometers back without shedding a single tear on the road. Only when she entered the house, closed the door, and saw her mother sleeping far too thin in a hammock that no longer filled her as before, did she sit on the packed earth floor and cry until she had no voice left. Vicente found her like that at dusk and said nothing for a long time. He just sat beside her on the floor and held her hand in silence, a silence that said more than any promise. "I'm going to build that workshop, Vicente," Marlene said at last, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Even if it's on the other side of the river, even if it's farther, harder. One day, that man will see me again, and it will be different." The answer came from a place Marlene did not expect. Dona Aus N.C.A., widow of an old muleteer, owner of a larger piece of land, though farther away, on the other side of the river, near the stone road no one used anymore since they opened the new bridge. "It's far from the good water, my daughter, and the ground is drier," warned Dona Ausancia, a soft-spoken woman with eyes that seemed to have already seen everything. "But it's mine, and I don't care who you are or aren't. I care about who works properly, and you work." It was not the land of her dreams. The water had to be drawn from a deep well, dug with sledgehammer and hoe by Vicente and 2 young men from the village who agreed to help in exchange for new clothes for their sisters' weddings. The first months were of sun breaking their backs and fabric ruined because the shed still had no proper roof. But Marlene did not stop. Every dress sold became a nail, a tile, a meter of pipe. Every compliment from a satisfied customer became a recommendation for another town, another order. And little by little the clay lintu became a brick shed, and the shed became a workshop with 2 dyeing tanks, long clotheslines in the afternoon sun, and a name painted by hand at the entrance, Tecidos Aires. Vicente proposed to Marlene under that freshly painted sign, without a gold ring, only with a wooden wedding band he himself had carved on the nights when exhaustion would not let him sleep. "I have no land to offer you," he said, kneeling on the packed earth, his calloused hands holding hers. "I only have this, my hands, my work, and the certainty that I will never leave you alone on a road again." "It's more than many rich people have to offer," Marlene answered. And the whole village celebrated the wedding with a party that lasted until dawn. Food brought by every family, and Dona Zulmira, weaker each month, sitting in the place of honor, smiling as she had not smiled in years. The marriage joined 2 hands and 2 destinies, and Tecidos Aires grew along with that love. Marlene began supplying dyed fabric to shops in 3 neighboring towns, then to a small clothing factory that needed a reliable and honest supplier. A rare thing in those days of easy promises and late deliveries. Meanwhile, on the other side of the river, Anselmo Brandau's luck was taking a different path. The drought of the last 2 years punished his plantations because he refused, out of pride, to change the old way of planting. His son, Otavio, trained in agronomy in the capital, tried to convince his father to invest in new irrigation, in modern techniques. "You need to adapt," Father Otavio would say at the dinner table, watching the bank statements pile up in a drawer his father pretended not to open. "The world has changed. People you never imagined are prospering, and we are falling behind. I built this farm the way my father built it," Anselmo would answer, striking the table with his hand. "And I'm not going to learn now, in old age, from someone who has no name at all in the region. But debts do not respect pride." And while Anselmo refused to change, Tecidos Aires, now registered as Aires y Bastos Comércio de Tecidos, hired 3 more seamstresses from the village, bought a 2nd dyeing tank, and began negotiating with cotton suppliers from the entire region, including, without anyone yet knowing, lands that bordered the Brandao farm itself. Dona Zulmira watched the company grow far more than anyone in the village expected. She saw her daughter in a new dress. She saw her son-in-law building an extra room in the house. She saw grandchildren playing in the workshop yard. Among the rolls of fabric, with the money that finally came in properly, Marlene took her mother to a doctor in the big city, something that had never been possible before. And little by little that old cough, which so frightened the family on cold nights, gave way to a new breath, almost forgotten. You didn't need that piece of his land to succeed, said Donna Zulmira, already back to her old strength, one evening in the workshop yard, watching the grandchildren run among the colorful clotheslines. You succeeded with what no one could take from you. Your work, and your way of being a person, even when they treated you as if you weren't. Marlene kept those words like someone keeps a jewel, and she did not yet know that, in a few months, she would need them more than ever. The bank notice arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, in a brown envelope that Ottavio opened, with hands trembling more than he cared to admit. Foreclosure of the mortgage on part of the Brandau lands. 90 days to pay off the debt, or lose the property at auction. Anselmo, already more stooped than a year earlier, grayer, reread the paper 3 times, as if the words might change on the 4th reading. He did not. We need a buyer for the surplus cotton, father, and we need it fast, and at a price above market. Otherwise the accounts won't close even with the sale of part of the land, said Ottavio, leafing through a list of possible buyers. There's a company here that buys in large quantities and pays on time, with a reputation for being the most serious in the region. Aires and Bastos. Anselmo felt the name like a stone in his shoe, an uncomfortable memory he preferred not to examine closely. Aires, he repeated softly. Isn't that the seamstress who came here years ago asking to buy that piece of It's the same one, father. Only today she's not a seamstress. She's the owner of one of the largest textile workshops in the region, and her husband handles the business side. If it's not her, I don't know who else has the capital and interest to get us out of this mess in time. The silence that fell in that room was heavier than any debt written on paper. Anselmo spent the night without sleep, turning over in his mind the image of the woman standing at the gate, the envelope of money trembling in her hands, and his own voice saying, "People like you will never be people like me." The next day, it was he himself, without sending his son ahead, who asked to be received at the Aries and Bastos workshop. He arrived hat in hand, the same hat he had worn years before at the farm gate, only now it seemed to weigh more on his head. Marlene received him in the small room that served as an office, surrounded by rolls of colored fabric and the smell of natural dye she herself had learned to prepare. She did not smile, did not strike a pose of victory. She simply offered a chair and a glass of water, the same kindness he had never offered her. "I've come to ask for a deal." "Donna Marlene," said Anselmo, his voice without the weight of before. "I need to sell my surplus cotton, and I need a buyer who pays fairly and quickly. I've heard that you are that person." Marlene remained silent for a moment, looking at the man who seemed to have shrunk since the last time they had seen each other. She remembered her mother, the gate closed in her face, the workers' laughter, and also the words Donna Zu. "Do you remember what you said to me that day at your gate?" she asked, without rancor in her voice, only with the firmness of someone who can finally speak as an equal. "I remember," Anselmo answered, eyes down. "I remember every word, and I'm not proud of any of them. I could close this door right now, the way you closed that gate," said Marlene. "It would be easy, but my mother taught me something else. That winning is not humiliating the one who humiliated you. It's showing that you are different from what they made you suffer." She paused, looking at her husband, Vicente, who had entered the room and stood in the doorway listening. "I'll buy your cotton, su Anselmo, at the fair market price, without taking advantage of your urgency. And, if you wish, my company can finance the new irrigation your son has been asking for 4 years, in partnership with a signed contract and clear terms. It's not charity, it's business between people who work." Anselmo lowered his head, and for the first time in many years someone in the village saw that man cry. There, sitting on a simple chair in a workshop, he had once sworn people like Marlene would never have the means to build. It was Donna Zulmira, already back to her usual strength, who entered the room at that moment carrying another glass of water, and saw with her own eyes the man who had closed the gate in her daughter's face, now asking, with humility, to be heard. "Why are you doing this for me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "After everything I said." "Because my mother died without a single piece of land in her name," Marlene answered, "and even so, she died rich. Su Anselmo, rich in dignity. I don't want to own any land that makes me forget that." The agreement was signed that same week. Months later, the Brandau farm had new irrigation, the debt paid off, and a new sign at the entrance of the property, beside the old one partnership Aires y Bastos, Fazenda Brandão. Otavio, who had always defended modernization, became the link between the two families, working side by side with Vicente in the administration of the joint business and the piece of land that had once been denied to Marlene. That strip of scrub beside Donna Zulmira's house ended up becoming, by Anselmo's own decision, a gift of reconciliation, donated to Donna Zulmira in person, so that there, at last, she herself could plant with her own hands the herb and flower garden she had always wanted, without ever again depending on any closed gate. This story reminds us of something the world insists on forgetting. The value of a person never lay in the size of the land they own, in the name they carry, or in the gate that opens or closes for them. Marlene was judged by the appearance of poverty, but she carried within herself a wealth no farmer could measure. The wealth of honest work, of patience, and of the ability to forgive without forgetting who she was. And Anselmo, in the end, learned the hardest lesson of life. That pride can hold a closed gate for a time, but it does not hold a debt. It does not hold a dry plantation, and much less does it hold the soul of a man who late but recognizes his own mistake. The question remains, for you who are listening, how many times have we judged someone by the appearance of today, without imagining the strength that person carries for tomorrow? And how many times, when we win, do we choose to be different from those who made us suffer? If this story touched your heart, leave here in the comments the part that moved you most, and don't forget to subscribe here to the channel to follow the next story. A big hug, and until next time.